So today's guest is Dr. Jim DeMesa, who is the president and the CEO of Emerald Health Pharmaceuticals. Dr. DeMesa, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Tay. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So a little bit of background information. I noticed that you're the CEO of Emerald Health Pharmaceuticals, but there is also an Emerald Health Biosciences that I interviewed Dr. Murphy with. Can you tell us a little bit about the corporate setup and what the company does exactly?
Yeah, sure. A guy named Avtar Dhillon, who's an MD and I've known for 25 years, looked at the opportunity to start a company based on cannabinoids in very general terms. And so he started a private company called Emerald Health Sciences with the mission of building a group of companies in all areas of cannabinoids, all the way from cannabis growing and extracting all the way to pharmaceuticals, and started acquiring and starting up various companies that were in this space. Emerald Health Pharmaceuticals is one of those companies that was started from scratch. Emerald Bioscience, which you mentioned with Dr. Brian Murphy, was a public company already, and Emerald Health Sciences acquired a majority stake in that. There's Emerald Health Therapeutics, which is more on the grow and extraction side of the cannabis industry. They're based in Canada, and they were, again, Emerald Health Sciences acquired a majority or a controlling stake in Emerald Health Therapeutics. And then there are several other companies. For example, Emerald Health Biotechnology, they're a nutraceutical company that uses the endocannabinoid system as a basis for natural products to help with various conditions like sleep and anxiety and inflammation and things like that. So it's a whole spectrum of different companies. We're all separate companies, but we are partially owned at least by one entity, which is called Emerald Health Sciences. So that's how we all fit together.
Got it. Is there any major communication or collaboration that goes on between these sub-companies, or is it just from a corporate structure standpoint?
It's mostly from a corporate structure. I mean, we obviously all know each other, and I know Brian Murphy very well. I know Riaz Bandali, who's the CEO of Emerald Health Therapeutics, very well, and so we all know each other, but there's very little interaction between the companies. We run completely separate organizations, and we all have different management teams, and so we operate differently, and we all have different types of technologies as well.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you for that background. So let's dig a little deeper into Emerald Health Pharmaceuticals. So tell us a little bit about where the company is based and what are the molecules that you're looking at currently, and if you have anything that's on the market available at this point.
Okay, sure. Yeah, Emerald Health Pharmaceuticals, we were formed 3 years ago in March of 2017, and we're based, to answer your question, in San Diego, California. We're a private company, and we are developing molecules for a variety of diseases that currently have unmet medical needs. But what's interesting is that the technology that we have we acquired this technology. It originated almost 20 years ago, and Professor Eduardo Munoz, who is our chief scientific officer, he's an MD, a professor, an MD, PhD, immunologist, so he has interest and background in autoimmune types of diseases. Well, about almost 20 years ago, he hooked up with one of the key opinion leaders in natural product science and chemistry, Professor Giovanni Appendino, who's a PhD. And between the two of them, they were very interested in natural products, mostly of plant origin. So they started working on different types of opportunities to treat diseases, and because of their background, they focused on natural products, and again, mostly of plant origin, and they looked at a variety of things. They started out by looking at physiologic outcomes that they could achieve. Eduardo Munoz, for example, as I mentioned, he's a physician, an MD, so he wanted to have products that could actually treat diseases, that had anti-inflammatory activity, anti-fibrotic activity, autoimmune activity, reducing neuroinflammation and things like that. And then they looked to find an ideal molecule that could fit those needs. And they ended up finding that the cannabinoid molecules were the ideal molecules that could actually target biologic receptors and pathways in the body that could treat these diseases. We actually call it the unique convergence of biology, science, and cannabinoids. And that forms our technology platform, which consists now, after all this work over the last decade and a half or so, consists of 25 proprietary molecules that are all derivatives of either CBD, cannabidiol, or CBG, cannabigerol, and we have patents and intellectual property and lots of differences from the natural products and the natural molecules. So it really is a great convergence of biology, science, and cannabinoids that creates our technology. To answer your other question, though, this is a drug development pathway. So we have nothing on the market at this point. We're in clinical development. Our goal when we started Emerald Health Pharmaceuticals back in 2017 was, number one, to build a management team that had experience in biotechnology and pharmaceutical product development. And we've been able to do that. Every single member of our management team has over 30 years experience in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology product development and leadership area. And we were also very fortunate to attract scientists, globally recognized scientists and clinicians around the world that can help us to advance our product lines. But we have to go through the regulatory FDA in the US and EMA in Europe and other regulatory agencies through the clinical development process, which we're now, as I mentioned, our goal was to get preclinical into human clinical studies when we started the company within 2 years. We actually beat that goal and did it within a year and a half. So we're right now in starting phase 2 clinical development with our lead product candidate, which is a CBD-derivative. We call it EHP-101, and it's being focused on multiple sclerosis and systemic sclerosis. Systemic sclerosis is a rare, devastating form of scleroderma, and we're starting phase 2 in those indications at this point. So that's where we are with the company.
Fantastic. Just out of curiosity, what is the prevalence of those disease states you mentioned? And are you guys going for orphan disease status within the FDA?
Yeah, good question. Our strategy from the beginning was to look at various indications in these areas that could address the biologic targets that we were addressing with our proprietary molecules. And so we have a large market opportunity. By the way, just to back up a step, we have two molecules, two product candidates in development. We call the one I just mentioned EHP-101, the CBD-derivative. And we have another molecule called EHP-102, which is a CBG-derivative. And for both of them, we wanted to look at diseases that currently have no cure, have unmet medical needs, are not appropriately treated at this point. And also look at opportunities that were very large market opportunities, but also some rare diseases that don't have current treatment options. So for our EHP-101 molecule, product candidate, we're targeting multiple sclerosis and systemic sclerosis. As I mentioned, multiple sclerosis affects about 2.3 million people worldwide. And as you probably know, there's no effective treatment, certainly no cure. Most of the treatments currently are symptomatic treatments. They're immunosuppressives or immunomodulators. And so they don't have effective treatments, but a large market opportunity. And then systemic sclerosis, as I mentioned, is a rare disease. And yes, we have received orphan drug designation in both the U.S. and Europe for our systemic sclerosis disease indication. And we've also received fast track designation from the U.S. FDA because there's currently nothing on the market that is approved for systemic sclerosis. So it needs a treatment. And similarly, then the same thing with EHP-102. We're focused on Parkinson's disease, which is a large market opportunity. About 10 million people worldwide have Parkinson's disease. And then also we're focused on Huntington's disease, another rare disease. And we've again achieved orphan drug designation in both the U.S. and Europe for Huntington's disease. So really great opportunities, but all of them have unmet medical needs. So we're very excited that our technology looks to be able to potentially be disease modifying in these diseases.
Amazing. Now, is there a benefit to having that orphan disease status designation?
Oh yeah, it's a great benefit. Number one, it provides some advantages through the development process. I mean, you get in the U.S., for example, you get a lot more opportunity to interact with the FDA, and they usually, for example, with our EHP 101, they've already granted us fast track designation. Part of that is because it's an orphan drug with no current opportunities for treatment. And then down the road, once it also, from a development perspective, it gives us the opportunity to meet with the FDA to fine tune our clinical program. But then if it does get approved, then in the U.S. with orphan drug designation, there's 7 years of market exclusivity, which means that no other similar drug could be used for systemic sclerosis in the U.S. And in Europe, it's a 10-year market exclusivity. So in addition to our intellectual property portfolio, which is very strong because we are new chemical entities and we have 17 granted patents, and these are composition of matter patents. In addition to that intellectual property position, we have this market exclusivity in the U.S. and Europe because we have been designated as an orphan drug in those indications.
Amazing. Now, you mentioned that the company works with derivatives of CBG and CBD. Is there a difference between derivative versus analog and prodrug molecules? And if so, what are those differences?
Yeah, there are some differences. So certainly from the standpoint of the prodrug versus a derivative, a prodrug is as you know, is a molecule that then when it enters the body, it becomes the actual molecule that would be desired. For example, a THC prodrug is a slightly modified or different molecule that when it enters the bloodstream and into the body, it becomes THC and acts just like THC. Ours is not like that. Ours is and analogs are all a little closer to derivatives, but not quite the same. They're really more of different forms of the same molecule. But ours is a completely different molecule. Ours, and this has been done through rational drug design with the fellows that I mentioned that really are the foundation and the start and the discoverers of this, Eduardo Munoz and Giovanni Appendino. What they wanted to look at is completely different molecules that not only affect, that were started from cannabinoids, so they affect the endocannabinoid system, like cannabinoids do, but not only affect those receptors, the CB2 receptors in the endocannabinoid system, but affect receptors outside the endocannabinoid system that are biologic and physiologic receptors and pathways in the body that can actually treat these diseases. So it's a quite different technology, but that's also, going back to my previous comment, why we have been able to get patents, composition of matter patents, on our products, because they're completely new molecules that have different attributes, different side chains and chemical structures, while retaining the architecture of the cannabinoid. But these additional chemical structures allow them to interact with validated biological targets that are validated for specific diseases like multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease and others.
Now, are cannabinoids unique in this respect? Is there another chemical class that is so flexible in treating so many different disease types?
Well, there are several different things, and a lot of this is known throughout the scientific world. For example, both of our molecules in development right now have what's called a quinone group that is included into, for example, in our CBD-derivative, there's what's called chemically a quinone group that's incorporated into the molecular structure that allows our molecule to affect what's called the PPAR gamma receptors in the body and other receptors and pathways in the body that CBD does not do. But we then by the way, there's another side chain on that allows our molecule to affect CB2 receptors in the endocannabinoid system that even CBD does not affect as powerfully. But to answer your question, Taya, we don't really have a specific class currently that our molecules are described with. It's actually a whole new class of molecules that has not been yet described. So we're a first-in-class mechanism.
Oh, interesting. Now, you mentioned quinone, and can't help but to ask about COVID and if there's any studies that have been done on that particular virus, or if there's anything that's coming out that is cannabinoid related within the company.
Yeah, we know that we have some anti-infective capabilities, but we have done nothing related to COVID at all at this point. It certainly has been a question that's been asked of us because of our mechanism of action, which could lend itself to it. But we've been so focused on the targets that we're addressing, which are multiple sclerosis and systemic sclerosis, Parkinson's and Huntington's disease, that we have not deviated from that. And especially because as I mentioned, we have great people on our team, but we're a very small team. We have a total of about 16 people in the company. So we're if you can appreciate, we're just going into phase 2 in the last year and a half, going from animals to phase 2. We've been able to do that with a very small team. So we have not deviated from our focus and not looked at anything in the COVID-related environment.
Now, a couple of questions that always come up. One of them have to do with why pharmaceutical cannabinoids? Why not, use a whole cannabis or hemp tincture on a daily basis for preventative measures? Is that a question that has come up for you, and what is the answer to that?
We haven't gotten that question a lot, but it certainly is a topic of discussion that we've had with people, and part of it, it's a very broad discussion that could be had on this subject. As I mentioned, what our scientists and Eduardo Munoz, Giovanni Appendino wanted to do is wanted to take what they knew about the cannabinoid molecules, which have many health benefits, as you're pointing out. They act on the endocannabinoid system. They have anti-inflammatory and neuroprotective capabilities. So if people with the diseases that we're targeting, with multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease or scleroderma, systemic sclerosis, if they take cannabinoids, they will probably help reduce the symptoms. People with multiple sclerosis, for example, have spasticity and pain. And if they take cannabis, whether they smoke it or vape it or edibles or in whatever format they do, they're going to feel better. The probability, however, and the likelihood is that it will not reverse the progression of those diseases. These are progressive, devastating diseases that generally lead to death. And that progression will not be changed in our experience so far, and everything the scientific literature shows will not be changed. It will help improve the symptoms dramatically, and everybody's different. But again, what our molecules do is many levels beyond that. And so it affects certain receptors and pathways in the body that none of the cannabinoids affect. And these receptors and pathways in the body are validated receptors for the diseases that we're targeting. And so we've done a lot of work preclinically in animal studies, for example, validated animal studies in multiple sclerosis, 4 different studies that have all shown the same results, that number one, improve the symptoms just like cannabinoids do, but more important, or just as important, not more importantly, just as importantly, they actually reverse the progression of the disease. So, for example, in multiple sclerosis, which is what's called a demyelinating disease. In our nerves, we have a sheath around our nerve cells called myelin, and this myelin sheath is destroyed in multiple sclerosis. And once it's destroyed or damaged, that's irreversible, including with marijuana or cannabis. But our molecules have been shown to actually not only stop the demyelination process in multiple sclerosis, but actually remyelinate the nerves, which is something Nothing else currently on the market can do this. So it's a completely different perspective, not only benefiting the person symptomatically, but also potentially reversing, and maybe in the ideal world, if this really happens, is to be able to cure these diseases, which is something that at this point the cannabinoids cannot do.
Right, and really no disease class has ever been able to do that so far. So that seems very
Correct.
exciting. So the results you're describing are results of phase 2 animal model studies, or?
Yeah, we've done, as I mentioned, our scientific team led by Eduardo Munoz has done multiple animal studies in all the different disease indications that we're focusing on. Again, multiple sclerosis, systemic sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, and Huntington's disease, with very similar results, improving the clinical symptoms, and in many cases, not only improving them, but completely eliminating the clinical symptoms. We've got some pretty dramatic videos of these studies which show that these animals that are induced to have multiple sclerosis, for example, by demyelinating their nerves, are completely symptomatic. They can barely walk. They can't stand. They obviously very sick with multiple sclerosis. And these are ones that are not treated with our molecule. And then the ones that are treated with our molecule are acting completely normal. There's no signs of MS at all. In fact, their nerves have been completely stopped from the demyelination process and actually remyelinated. So we've talked with several clinicians in the multiple sclerosis environment, and we've, as I mentioned, some of our clinical advisory board members in multiple sclerosis are some of the leading experts in the world in MS. And they say that this is the holy grail. If this can be replicated in humans, as we've shown in animals, then this is a game changer for the treatment of multiple sclerosis. So we're very excited about that.
Amazing. When do you plan to begin human trials?
We have just completed in September of last year, we completed a large phase 1 study on EHP-101, our lead product candidate that's a CBD-derivative. And so we're now initiating phase 2 first in systemic sclerosis. In fact, and we're starting this phase 2 program in Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. And so our first patient just got started screening in the last couple of days in Australia. And we have a couple of sites ready to start in New Zealand and in the U.S. within the next few weeks. A lot of people ask, how has this COVID pandemic affected the start of our phase 2 program? And while it has had some delays because the sites, the clinical sites that we're using throughout the world have had to focus on, number one, emergency medical care for people that are affected by the COVID pandemic, but also for the safety and health of the people that work in these clinics. So it has reduced our ability to bring in patients by a couple of months. But as I mentioned, that's now opening up, and we just got our first patient started to screen, and we expect to have our first patient dosed, systemic sclerosis patient dosed, in the next month and a half, and then we'll start seeing phase 2 clinical data around the end of this year, beginning of preliminary data, beginning of next year. And we expect to start our multiple sclerosis initiation of phase 2 later this year as well. So we're fully engaged in our phase 2 program for our lead product candidate.
And for your phase 2, how many patients do you typically enroll?
Well, for systemic sclerosis, we're separating our phase 2 into a phase 2A study, which is the one we're starting now, and we're looking at doing about 36 patients in this phase 2A study. It's going to be focused on looking at various dose levels of our product candidate, as well as the tolerability, the safety, and the preliminary efficacy, which in our phase 1 study showed excellent safety and tolerability results and very good pharmacokinetics. So the way the drug moves through the body and so forth is all perfectly aligned with what we need to do. And then we'll move into phase 2B in systemic sclerosis, which will add about another 120 to 150 patients. And because this is, going back to your earlier question about what advantages orphan drug designation and fast track gets us, well, it's possible that we could then move into one registration study to get the product closer to approval much more quickly because it is an orphan drug designated product candidate and because we have fast track. For multiple sclerosis, it looks like we will do an initial phase 2 study with probably starting with about 60 to 120 patients, so a bit larger in MS, and a longer term study as well initially because of the progressive nature of the disease. So it's very exciting and it's all happening right now for us.
That's amazing. Wow. It sounds like there's a lot of exciting news coming down the pipe as well. So congratulations for all that you've accomplished. Are you guys publicly traded or not?
No, we're a private company. We just completed a round of financing under what's called the Regulation A+ process by the Securities and Exchange Commission. It's a type of round of financing that's available to individual investors. We're looking at probably initiating another round in the next couple of months to get us through those phase 2 studies that I just talked about in systemic sclerosis and multiple sclerosis. And then our plans are at some point in the next year or so, once we start getting our phase 2 data, then we would like to entertain becoming a public company, doing an IPO in the U.S. But right now we are a private company, so it's a good time to be a private company with what's going on.
Right.
And we have been very successful in because of the quality of our science, the diseases that we're targeting that are so impactful in the world right now and that have no cure. We've been very successful in being able to raise money to move us through our clinical development and our product development programs.
And for those investors that are interested in engaging with your company, is there still an opportunity for them to jump in, or do they have to wait for another announcement?
Yeah, they'll have to wait. We had to close our financing on June the 6th. So just recently we closed our recent financing. But as I mentioned, our plan is to we've got so much interest, number one, in people wanting to invest. We're getting emails every day about how can I invest and so forth. And because we have a fairly extensive clinical program ahead of us, before we do an IPO, we'd like to get our financial position solidified. And so I would say probably in the July, August timeframe, we will open up a pre-IPO round for individual investors. And for people that are interested, they can keep track of us either through our website, which is at emeraldpharma.life. And or through our newsletters and so forth. So we definitely will be opening things up for people in the near future.
And we'll also include that address on the show notes as well, so they can find you easily if they wish to. Now,
perfect.
As I was reviewing your bio, I found out something really interesting about you, and that is you're a happiness coach. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, yeah. That was mostly a hobby that turned into a business for me. Just how things go. You being at the right place at the right time. I was looking back in 20 years ago. I was just engaged in a lot of different things and setting goals and becoming a leader. And I was a physician and I wanted to get into the pharmaceutical industry and build companies and so forth. And I actually had bought some tapes and listened to some tapes from Tony Robbins. He's a well-known personal development and motivational expert. And so I happened to be sitting in my health club one day, and I was looking at the Wall Street Journal, and there was an ad for a Tony Robbins ad was coming to Florida, which is where I'm from. And the guy sitting next to me asked me if I was interested in Tony Robbins. And make a long story short, we talked for a little while. Because of my MD, my physician background with an MBA, the guy said, well, Tony's looking for a partner just like you. So again, making a long story short, Tony Robbins and I became partners in helping physicians and other healthcare practitioners who usually, and I was one of them, live very unbalanced and sometimes unhappy lives to be more balanced and live happier, more productive and fulfilled lives. So Tony and I started that business together, and one thing led to another. I wrote a book on happiness, and I started a website called BeHappy101.com, and it became a hobby of mine, but all of it focused on helping people to live the life they want to live and to be fulfilled as part of that life. So it's all part of my physician background, trying to help people live happier, healthier, more productive lives. So that's the short version of a long story.
An amazing story. Do you feel that going through that journey kind of brought you into this position that you're at as a CEO of a biotech company and really leading change in a very important area of disease management?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that whole process, again, I don't want to go off too much on Tony Robbins, but one of the first times he and I sat down together when we were starting this company together, he asked me a bunch of questions and getting to know me and what I wanted to be and do with my life. And it made a drastic change in my life and in my career. And I say right now, because people ask me, you spent all that time going to medical school and residency, and then you're not practicing medicine anymore. And I said, yeah, but if I had never become a doctor, I wouldn't be where I am today. And if I had never met Tony Robbins and talked about what I really wanted for my life, I would never be doing what I am today. And it's so fulfilling and so impactful, not only for me, but for the people I work with and the people that could potentially be benefited by the therapies that we're developing. So it's quite an exciting situation for me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your story with us. This has been an incredible conversation. Is there any last points that you want to share with the audience?
I think you've covered a great amount of ground. I just invite anybody who wants to look at us more closely and potentially invest in the future to look at our website and get to know us. Feel free to contact us, especially one of the things I present at conferences all over the world. And when I present about this, it's almost every time I have somebody come up afterwards that says, I have a friend or a brother or a relative with Parkinson's disease or multiple sclerosis. How can I help them with what you're doing? And so that would be the only other thing I would say is if anybody listening does have a friend, relative, colleague, a loved one that has any of these diseases and we can help in any way, we'd love to do that. That's our mission, and we'd love to be able to help in any way possible. So please contact us.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for your time. This has been a wonderful conversation, and we'll look forward to seeing your clinical results and your future successes.
Thank you very much, Taya. It was great to be part of this today.
Thank you.